I'm Walter Mullen, publisher of the Daily Catch. Welcome to another episode of The Catch-Up. For years, the town of Rhinebeck has paid the village of Rhinebeck to provide firefighting and EMS services to large parts of the town. Now that arrangement is under strain. Town Supervisor Elizabeth Spinzia is arguing that village leaders have failed to provide a clear, detailed accounting of the village fire department's budget and of the town's nearly $280,000 annual contribution toward it. Village Mayor Gary Bassett strongly disagrees, saying the town is getting a great deal for excellent service and is paying only about half the true cost. At the center of the dispute, transparency, trust, and a broader backdrop of political tension between the town and the village. Today, we welcome Rhinebeck beat reporter Eloise Goldsmith back to the show to break down what's being argued, what's known, and what remains unresolved. It's the week of January 26th. Eloise, welcome back to the studio.
Glad to be here.
So let's start, Eloise, by explaining this arrangement between the town of Rhinebeck and the village of Rhinebeck as it pertains to firefighting and EMS services. Most people probably know the fire station sits very prominently in the village of Rhinebeck. So what does this mean?
So the town of Rhinebeck is required to provide firefighting services for residents who live in this area of town that's known as the Rhinebeck Fire Protection District. It is a section of town that has no dedicated fire department. So it sits outside of the village, which, as you just mentioned, has a fire department. And it also is outside of the town's two fire districts, Hillside and Rhinecilff, both of which have a fire department. So for years, the town has elected to contract with the village's municipal fire department to service this area.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. And there's also a very specific contract between the town and the village that stipulates how much the town will pay the village. Tell us more about the contract. What's the time frame on the contract and how much money is involved?
So the most recent contract signed between the town and the village for fire coverage for this specific area was signed in 2024, and the contract runs for the calendar years of 2025 and 2026. And it lists the town's contribution as a flat fee of $277,000 for 2025 and $286,000 for 2026. And I want to mention one other thing because it is important to get the numbers right for this story. There was also a second contract between the town and the village for 2025 for firefighting services. And this, we don't need to get super into this, but essentially in 2025, the town transferred coverage it had with the Hillside Fire Department to the Village Fire Department for a chunk of 2025. So all you need to know is that brings the town's contribution to the village a little bit higher to $319,000 for 2025.
Okay, got it. A lot of numbers, but it makes sense. So the town of Rhinebeck agreed to the current contract, but now they're questioning the amount of money they're paying to the village for fire and EMS services. Does the town feel they're paying too much money?
So when I first sat down with Supervisor Spinzia, her central concern was that the town was possibly paying more than its fair share for these services. Here's where that concern comes from. Over the summer, the supervisor says that she took a closer look at the village's budget documents and the contract that we just talked about. And based on her reading of those materials, it looked like the town's payments to the village accounted for nearly all of the village's fire department revenue and more than its listed expenses. She shared this information with the town board. Chauncey Walker, who was at the time on the town board, told me that they wanted to know more. They were concerned. Spinzia then sent a message to the village treasurer with questions. She asked questions like, are there other expenses for the village fire department other than what's included in this budget that I'm looking at? She also submitted a records request, which the village complied with, but it didn't fully answer her questions. So by fall of 25, she still doesn't have the full financial picture that she's after.
Does Town Supervisor Spinzia have any issues with the quality of the service the fire department is providing?
No, and this is a really important point to make, is that she says that the firefighting and EMS services that the town is getting are great. She said that they're superb, no complaints there.
Okay, so the issue centers around money. In your story about this, you use the words, quote, opaque accounting. Would you say a little more about this?
Yeah, so I teased it a little bit in my last answer or two answers ago, but Spinzia's biggest concern is that she says Mayor Gary Bassett hasn't provided financial transparency when it comes to the fire department budget. She says the mayor has not given a sufficient breakdown of the quote unquote true fire department budget. And she's also questioned whether the village is using fire department money for other general fund expenses.
So the town asked for a breakdown of the budget to understand it and how their annual contribution fits into the overall expense. And the village responded, but what's the village's position in all of this? How are they responding to this story?
Sure. So the mayor did supply a breakdown of the budget for the village's 2025-2026 fiscal year. And he says what he provided is a breakdown that is inclusive of all costs associated with the fire department. It totals $626,000. He sent it over to the town board early January. And so this would mean, if we take his 626K budget, that the town's contribution constitutes about half of the budget of the fire department. He created a graphic to go along with the budget. It's a pie chart, and it breaks out the total into different cost categories. So admin, operations, insurance. So the budget includes, for example, $49K for admin, just as an example. Spinzia says this is not sufficient. What she wants to see is, how did the mayor arrive at $49,000 for administrative costs? She wants to see the actual expenses that contribute to that cost total. Village Mayor Gary Bassett says that the town is getting a really good service for a good price. He faults the supervisor for bringing this up mid-contract. And he says if the town wants, they could go elsewhere for coverage, and that's up to them once this contract elapses. And here's how he explains his 626 budget total. He says that there are some expenses in the budget that go 100% toward the fire department, and those are listed as the fire department budget in the village's budget documents online. So you or I could go online and find that number. It's broken out in the budget. Other costs, however, are partially allocated to the department and need to be added in to get the true budget. So as an example, his total 626 budget also includes a small portion of his salary as mayor. He also says that the village has to provide certain equipment to service the town that they might not need otherwise. So that is another thing that needs to be accounted for when the village decides how much to charge the town.
So it's understandably complicated, as any would be. But the timing of this is interesting because it comes during a period of broader tensions between some town and village leaders over other issues. And we have to talk about this. What are these other issues? And can you talk a bit more about how this might fit in with this broader tension?
Yeah, so if you don't want to engage with the numbers of this story at all, understandable, there are a lot of them, and you just zoom out, this is another example where there's tensions brewing between some town leaders and village leaders. As we've talked about on this podcast, the town wants to impose an occupancy tax throughout the town, so a tax on tourists. Tourists would pay when they stay on Airbnbs and hotels. Over the summer, the village board passed a resolution objecting to the imposition of this tax. So that's one front. In the fall, there was also a last-minute write-in campaign to elect Gary Bassett to the role of supervisor, to oust Supervisor Spinzia. Bassett distanced himself from the effort, sort of, but didn't fulsomely denounce it. So there's some tension swirling there. So yeah, there's just a lot in the air.
And just to comment again, the fact that the town of Rhinebeck is questioning this in the middle of the contract period is a little unusual. You'd think they would have asked these questions before they signed the contract, perhaps.
Yes, and as a reporter, I try to refrain from putting my own analysis on things, but I think it might speak to a breakdown of trust. So previously, there was trust and this sense that we trust you to charge us the appropriate amount. We trust that your department numbers are sound, etc. And now, amid these other tensions, the supervisor is bringing more scrutiny to the fire department budget. Maybe she wouldn't have in the past without all these other things swirling there.
Good point. So let's pull the camera back just a little. Why should residents in the town of Rhinebeck or the village care about this?
I think there's two reasons. So people want their local officials to have good working relationships. Obviously, this fire protection district issue and contract has become fraught. Village trustee Lydia Slaby said that the conflict is, quote, damaging the intergovernmental relationship and distracting from our shared responsibility to serve the Rhinebeck community. That's a village leader weighing in. I think there's also the financial aspect. So everyone agrees that the village fire department provides this amazing service. They're really beloved. But it's not possible for a regular person, like for you, Walter, to go online and discern the true fire department budget, the one that the village mayor provided the town board in January. So maybe that's a problem, maybe it isn't. That's another aspect of this.
Good point. So Eloise, where does the story go from here? What are the next developments you're watching for as you continue to report on this?
So a day or two before we ran our story, Alan Scher, who is on the town board, the town official most involved with this issue besides Spinzia, he said that there was going to be a meeting between Spinzia and the village's lawyer to go over the budget that the mayor provided. Spinzia told me this morning that meeting has not taken place yet. So if that meeting happens and when is something that I'll be watching.
Great. Eloise, thank you for joining us today and walking us through this story. We look forward to reading more about it.
Thanks for having me.
That concludes this episode of The Catch-Up. If you like our broadcast, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform, and you'll be notified every time we drop a new show. Thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help producing today's episode, and thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. We'll see you next week for another episode of The Catch-Up.